Red Line Show. It is a talk show where we, with our colleagues, journalists, discuss the latest news in the world and how they will affect on the near and not near future. My name is Dmitro Kolniuk and my colleagues Pavlo Stelmach and Galia Babenko. Hello, my friends. As you know, we today discuss the Peace Summit.
Yeah, the long-awaited first Global Peace Summit organized in Switzerland and Bergenstock by Ukraine, which takes up to 100 countries and organizations together. And what did they discuss there?
Yes, and my first question to you, what is your opinion about this summit? What points did you point in this event?
Probably that this summit only concerns 3 of all the points, Ukraine's peace formula. It was just a start. And there was quite a detail, and I'd like to talk about that later. Probably you can present our second guest, Galia Babenko.
Well, I was presented, but I'm just processing, so I'm listening to you and to see how we can compare actually our thoughts. Because, like, for me, I actually thought that it was probably a diplomatic success, I would say, like 101 countries and organizations and the communique as a result of this conference. But it depends on the fact what it was actually. Like success as a diplomatic event? I think yes. Success as something that will lead to peace, like a starting point for peace? Probably not. And also another point is that we should probably start saying that China is not our friend, though President Zelensky highlighting that we'd like China to be our friend, it's not our enemy. At the same point, China made it perfectly clear that the country is not interested.
They declared where they stand.
It's not even about declaring where they stand. They are not neutral. It's pretty obvious whatever they say, but they just declared they are not interested in us. We have nothing to give them. They just don't see us. It's about territory and sovereignty, and they don't see it.
They don't see Ukraine probably as a sovereign country in this conflict, some conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And
but the main point that this summit was not about integrity, Ukrainian sovereignty. It's about food security, nuclear security, and prison exchange. It's all humanitarian points. It's not war points. It's not a diplomatic points. It's not points about war, about some maybe diplomacies, about geopolitics. It's about humanitarian points.
And even in these aspects, they don't care.
But maybe then this summit, it was a summit that shows the coalition between the Great War. It's one coalition who gathered in Switzerland and the other coalition who wasn't there.
Actually, I agree, because I've heard a lot of people say that it was not a peace summit, how we will get to peace. It was more like a summit who stands with the Ukraine.
Yeah, it's not a peace conference, but a geopolitical global event, which I too consider a great success, because we gathered a lot of countries, and all those represented, maybe you could show a map later, all those represented, they really show support for Ukraine's position.
All those represented.
Almost all of them,
Yeah,
for Ukraine's integrity, for the UN Charter, which is most important. And UN Charter declares that the war must end just. All wars are unjust, according to the UN. And we see those countries as our potential and real allies on future conferences. And I think that the second Global Peace Summit, as they call it, which they plan to organize until the end of this year, will be more of a peacekeeping summit. Yeah, we heard Olaf Scholz and President Zelensky talking about Russia being represented there, so it may be something really different to this one.
Yeah, and I actually have a great question for you. So about the second summit and like the timeline. So I heard Zelensky said that it will actually take place not in years, in the following years, but in the following month. Also, one of the representatives said that maybe it will even take place in 5 months. So they take elections in the US as, you know, like a deadline. Do you think it's actually realistic? Because I have to admit, this summit, for me, it's not like a really massive event that could even, you know, like postpone the elections in the US.
No, it won't postpone the elections. I think that elections will define which position will be stronger. I guess that Putin thinks if Trump wins the election, that he will be in a better position. He will have some benefits on the second peace summit.
I think that Putin wants not a victory one of the candidates, but the more chaos in the US, the better for Putin. So he not support one of the candidate in US, but the competition, the chaos in US, and it will be the best point for Putin.
Probably, but yet we have this culmination in November when the US will finally decide on their president. We remember 2020 elections, and still there are debates whether there was Russian intervention.
Well, obviously, if the Democrats won, there was. If Republicans won, we probably will not hear about intervention from Trump.
Maybe, but still the summit will very much depend on the results of
but do you see like it before the elections, like the summit?
I believe it will be after the elections, because we have to define the next 4-year representative of the United States, the major power, whether it is Democrats or Republicans. They will be the main strong hand on the second peace summit, dealing with the aggressors.
But answering on your question about 5 months, I think that it will not be in 5 months, because US will be interested in their elections. So they will not be put some effort for this summit. So that's why it must be done by another countries, and I don't think that another countries will be able to do such great summit. So my question to you another: what else countries do you want to see in this summit that happened in Switzerland and in the second one?
Well, actually, like I will just like add to your point about the US. It's not even a question whether the US will be an active participant, because we see that during this summit this country was not. So like the fact that Biden actually skipped it, and it's once again because I don't see that it, you know, like did something great and major. I actually even not like, I'm not offended by the fact that Biden skipped actually. Like, it's just like, you know, he had something better to attend, like, which is actually important for his, you know, domestic affairs.
And maybe for Ukraine too, because...
Probably, if we talk about the results of the elections, like for us, that's actually like, I'm not that offended. Like some people are that like, oh my God, the president did not attend actually. And I agree that if Biden did not attend this summit and the elections are in November, it's actually quite stupid to suggest that, oh, let's have another summit in November before or right after the elections. I don't see any, like, I guess it was supposed to sound like, yay, another summit only in 5 months, get ready, so we stand with you. But actually it sounded like, yeah, it's gonna be a chaos, let's have another summit. And my question is also, is 5 months enough to, like, so we only address 3 points of the peace formula. Is 5 months enough to move forward, and where exactly, what will change in 5 months so greatly that we will move forward?
First of all, the summit in Switzerland was prepared, as I remember, more than a year. and
Way more than a year.
Yes.
Yes,
It was
and,
since 2022.
and 3 points was declared just in months before the summit. So it's about the preparation. For me, it's maybe 2-3 months. But the points we can in the second summit we can add 1 point, not all the 7 that that in the list, but. It is a question what do we want from the second summit? If we want the final capitulation of Russia, it not in 5 months.
It is quite
Yeah,
unlikely.
so that's my question. You see, because these 3 points address the most general topics where
Non-political
everyone,
ones.
yes, even like the, members of BRICS, for example, who definitely are very close and have very close ties with Russia, economical, first of all, and they can't refuse to have them. Let's be, real. But they chose these topics yes, Ukrainian children, Ukrainian POVs. So obviously, whatever you actually support, you cannot say, yes, I do not support returning Ukrainian children back to, Ukraine. So they can't say that. Yeah. And they're very general. But see, even here in these 3 points, do you know which point actually was not acceptable, for example, for India? Why did they not sign the communique?
That's an interesting one. Please tell us.
I
You can get, let's make it more interesting for
Well,
the
it's
youth.
obviously not food security.
Obviously.
nuclear security.
Obviously.
Yeah. Yes,
So,
nuclear.
the fact that even the nuclear part actually addresses sovereignty and allowing Ukraine to actually, get to their sovereign territory, which is also the plant, it was the, red line for India, and they did not sign the communique.
It is quite an interesting moment because I would like to see on this summit both India and Brazil, which are really economic, South Africa, Brazil, members of the BRICS. Yeah. So we can talk about something real if they attend.
And in Africa, the situation is the worst. So this is
Africa is complete turmoil right now. Let's return to the question of time. And for this summit, I've heard quite radical statements by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, by Emmanuel Macron, France's president, and Ursula von der Leyen, president of the European Commission. And those statements about Ukraine's sovereignty, that they will help kick Russia out of Ukraine, they will help militarily with basically European military industry. That is what I wanted to hear in spring 2022, not in summer 2024.
Also, when we talk about the showing support for Ukraine, actually 78 countries and 4 organizations, this is not the biggest we've seen. So when they actually sign the UN, what do you call it? The UN document, when they were yes, we stand with Ukraine. So the biggest countries, the biggest number of countries that actually...
UN resolution.
Yes, resolution. The biggest number of countries we actually saw was 141, if I'm not mistaken. And that was in February 2023. So back when... 23.
Yeah, 1 year.
So it was
after the war
1
started.
year anniversary, and then they signed the resolution.
So good anniversary.
Yeah. What other word can you actually look for?
Yes.
Yes.
Marking.
Marking.
Not celebrating.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I heard is good because we move from the narrative, we will stand with Ukraine as long as it takes, to we will help Ukraine kick Russia out. That is with European industry, but still we have, I believe that's a great diplomatic, if you can say, failure that BRICS countries like Brazil, which is a very strong South American economy, did not attend this summit. Because Brazil is a democratic country after all, and we would be really glad to see them. Probably not South Africa and China, it is harder with those countries diplomatically, but we had quite good diplomatic ties with Brazil. Even before the war, 2019, 2020, President Zelensky went to Brazil actually, and we had military cooperation negotiations going on with that country.
Yes, and you see in Latin America, there are better situation for Ukraine because the communique was signed by 5 countries from Latin America. It's like 8 countries from all the Africa, where more than 50 countries, and 5 signs from Latin America, where 12 countries. So you see, we have a platform in the Latin America for Ukrainian support. Yeah, because Argentina, as I remember.
Yeah, Javier Milei demonstrates clearly his friendship towards Ukraine and President Zelensky. Inauguration, remember that.
Chile, Uruguay, these countries support Ukraine. Despite all the situation in Latin America, despite all the anti-imperialism in these countries,
despite the Russian propaganda in Latin America,
yes, and all these countries support Ukraine, and the main thing that they signed the communique. It's not like just come to the peace summit like Brazil, like Saudi Arabia. So, but we are glad that all these countries were in the Switzerland. But it is very good that we have many friends in different parts of the world, because as was announced by Zelensky many times in the Switzerland, there are countries from all the continents.
Yeah.
Yes, and from all continents we have signed a communique. It's not like they just come to the Switzerland, but they signed the communique final.
To sum up a little bit, I really liked the peace summit. So it was 15th, 16th of June, and it was a great pleasure to hear from those politicians declaring their strong positions. But what we will have in the results, it still depends. Like Zelensky addressed that Ukraine will present an action plan to Russia at the second peace summit. So do we want to move to seizing the fire right now already with this declaration?
We could make this declaration without seizing the fire. It's the first point. But I want, for me, it's like seizing the fire is. It is a good point when the discussion between 2 countries began. But it will be just, as you said, the proposition of Ukrainian plan to the Russia.
Yeah.
So it's not, it's the ceasefire in this case, for me, it's not like a very good idea.
And it will be supported by the majority, maybe we can say the economic majority of the world, because the opposition of the BRICS still cannot provide for that. And this summit itself, it irritates the Russian self-proclaimed president, I believe, because just a day or 2 before, he presented his peace plan. We remember that.
It's not a peace plan.
Yeah, so-called.
Is that's just what Russia actually offers, capitulation.
Capitulation of Ukraine.
It's not even a ceasefire.
And giving up territory.
They basically claim the 4, 5 regions, even those that are not fully occupied. So like, for example, Kherson region and Zaporizhia region, and they are not even fully occupied, and he's not even offering something, oh, let's sit and talk. And first of all, there is actually a question whether Ukraine and Russia can sit and talk. So it's not like the beginning of war, it's not like 2022. So first of all, we have to actually think about the option where we have intermediaries, and they actually help us, once again, like it was with the grain deal, they help us to arrange all of this. So yeah, it's like, it's negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, but with someone like the third party actually. So that's why also like, that's an interesting thing. Some countries, I believe, did not sign the communique to play that part, that role. Saudi Arabia, for sure,
Yeah, I wanted to point it out because Saudi Arabia helped us with children. And I believe that it is a greater position to Russia in the Middle East, and we will have some diplomatic movements with Saudi Arabia as an intermediary in future. I'm sure of that.
It's just like, it's funny because I saw like threads on Twitter, some girl wrote like, oh, I like Qatar, like this is such a great country, they are always so like, the country is so decent in geopolitics, and the same thing about like Saudi Arabia. And I was actually startled because yes, they help us with Ukrainian children, and we appreciate that. But usually, it's okay to save children and not to actually wish to kill them. So yeah, that's great. But we should not forget that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they actually use this to whitewash themselves.
Yeah, because human rights are important. Let's remember that.
Yeah.
And
Killing kids is not okay. Let's not forget that.
but still, the presence of Saudi Arabia at the summit, I believe this will result in something interesting in future, because Saudi Arabia is a rival of Iran in the Middle East stage, and we know very well that which side Iran is on because of the Shahed drones, and
You see, like that's the point. Nobody questions Iran, why Iran was not present.
Yeah.
But everybody questions China, and for me, that's actually very funny because
No, it's not funny because everybody understands that Iran on the Russian side, but everybody hopes that China is not on the Russian side, and we can turn to the our
Yeah,
side, China.
But I think they are on China's side, and that's very obvious. And there is nothing you can give from Ukraine to China right now.
But another country.
They are not even. You see, the point is we see China, which is like on the fence, thinking on whose side it is. It's not on the fence. It's not thinking. It's not seeing Ukraine. That's very difficult and hurtful to understand, but I think that's the case at this point.
probably they.
And it's okay. Like, it's okay because we talk about Russia. It's big and has a lot of gas and a lot of natural stuff they can give to their allies.
We can't really give anything to China because most of the Chinese investments in Ukraine were an Azovstal plant, so they were producing jointly with Ukraine the hell a lot of steel. And China is a major steel producer in the world. It is more economically important for them to maintain this neutrality and partnership without borders with Russia. But I still wonder quite a lot of times, what does that partnership without borders means for China and Russia?
You can only guess.
Yeah,
because-
I would like to see that in real life, like there's no real border in the Siberia again, Manchuria, maybe.
Oh, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, there is something going on between
Yes.
them, China or North Korea. So about China. So they want the access to the sea.
Yes, they. I don't remember the
Yeah.
correct name of the river,
yeah,
but
yeah.
Russia.
I believe Amur River.
No, that's too
It's like some small river, but Russia gives the opportunity of to China.
Oh, Tumen River.
Ah, okay, too many.
Like, yes.
Yes, and
So they have the access to the Sea of Japan.
yes, and another interesting information I read yesterday that Russian girls is attended to Chinese men. They all of them want to
Nothing changes.
to marry on the Chinese men because Chinese men they are alive and Russian men is not.
Yeah, it's quite different.
Mostly, that's the tendency.
I believe that's another point in the Chinese worldview, because they could view us as Taiwan, Russia's Taiwan.
That's exactly
Yeah.
what it is.
And I believe that we will not have a resolution of Chinese position until their questions with Taiwan are resoluted again.
The only state I see on the fence is not China, it's actually Ukraine. So we try to not call them enemy, but we don't call them friend. And at the same point, so while we are still trying to get attention from them, we do not act on Taiwan, we do not support them directly.
We even do not recognize that state.
And that also, we don't have any
You see,
ways to influence them, any ultimatums. We cannot offer that because we do not act on any of that option.
you see, in this case, Ukraine has some diplomatic problem because we had till 2022 we had two part of territory, Crimea, and some parts
Yeah,
of
some parts of
Donbass that are called themselves as independent one. That's why Ukraine in diplomatic sphere couldn't recognize the Taiwan, couldn't recognize the Kosovo.
yeah.
Yes, and this problem is a problem of Ukrainian diplomacy. because I think when we restored all that Ukrainian territorial integrity, then we recognize the Kosovo, then we recognize the Taiwan, and
I believe that's real deep into this.
It's just it's just another proof of how Russian propaganda is actually good, because it made it possible to make, you know, Donbass and Luhansk and Crimea equal to actually countries, like, you know, independent countries, where they have historical reasons why they can be independent. And then they just try to like spread propaganda and make them equal cases, which usually
like Abkhazia,
yes.
like
Yeah, let's
Obviously.
not forget that 20% of Georgia is still occupied by Russia since 2008.
And like Georgian president actually mentioned that, so like that.
Yes.
She emphasized.
And there was the Bucharest summit in 2008, where Ukraine and Georgia and Moldova were declined their NATO integration position, because we wanted to join NATO since that time. And a couple of months after that, we have Georgia invasion, then Ukraine invasion, and now we have to discuss this peace summit that decides nothing.
That's why I'm mostly interested in the Washington summit. Yeah, that is
The
going
next
to happen
Washington
soon.
NATO summit. We remember 2022. It was the crucial one where they declared Russia as a threat, and they started to the middle of 2024. They started, oh, Russia is really our enemy. They are aggressive. They want to shoot us. We should build ammunition plants. Like 2 years into the war, a massive war between Ukraine and Russia, the most major military conflict since World War II, and they like woke
It's
up.
just also interesting because Russia always mentions like NATO threat all the time when tries to, you know, base their arguments on something. Though we all understand that the real reason, like we saw it in Tucker Carlson interview, all this like history made up stuff. That's the real actually argumentation for that. But still, at the same time, while I emphasize on the NATO summit, so peace summit, like, on the other hand, it was essentially, you know, I think even like if it does not bring actual like results, because it was like, for me, it was not, I did not expect anything like major from it, but that's not bad. That's just normal. At the same time, just like presenting that Russia, China, they are like isolated, and the majority of the, you know, people in the world actually stand with Ukraine. Still,
That's a question.
It's not a majority because we have 3 countries: Nigeria, India, China, and it's
Yeah,
a majority of Ukraine.
if you count the population, then yes, obviously the majority of like
We talk about
States.
GDP and world economy, which is really interesting to me, that all those countries that support Ukraine support it to different extents. Obviously, the ones that provide weapons, that we buy weapons from, that will help us build military plants, are our real and most valuable allies. And Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, obviously said, it is one of my favorite statements, if Russia won't comply with peace proposals, which they will present later on, we will have to make it give up. And this is quite a statement, I believe it has something
Well,
behind.
they said the same about like economic sanctions. We will like
Yeah.
strangle them with economic sanctions, and they have just begun to implement the LNG, liquefied natural gas sanctions, just in the 14th package of sanctions, and it will be very, I would say, modest, because it will not curb the actual revenues.
Come on, 2.5 years into the war, and they've just sanctioned Mosbirja, the Moscow exchange for trading in dollars.
Though these sanctions actually, this is
Painful.
great.
Yeah, they're
This
very
is
painful.
really painful. Yep.
But about LNG, as you know, in June or in May, I don't remember, the import of gas from Russia is greater than from the USA in Europe. And you see, it's a question about the heating in, it's about heating, it's about
Yeah.
the enterprises in Europe, because they all need gas, and they need Russian gas because it's cheaper.
It's cheaper. Wait, it's closer, it's cheaper That's the whole point. We live in a globalized world where everyone needs everyone, and there's really no point in war.
That's true. So that's what I was thinking today. I was just like, we just cannot, just isolate and keep going. But just listen to what Putin actually stated ahead of his visit to North Korea. So he said, we, Russia and DPRK, will develop alternative mechanism of trade and mutual settlements that are not controlled by the West and jointly resist illegitimate unilateral restrictions.
That would be so hard. They have a common border that, yeah, it will be.
At this
really
point, it's also like a great statement for Russian and Korean people, North Korean people, but it's almost like it's not possible.
We had a story about North Korean workers, labor workers in Russian Far East, earning dollars there and providing them for North Korea's economy to survive. And that was a story on UATV channel.
Okay, but returning to the peace summit, which we forget.
Yeah.
Because it's just too comprehensive, you see?
Yes.
Because it all comes down to economics, economy. And yeah, it's like, if, that's why we just mentioned the Western allies. They cannot live without Russian gas. So when we talk about BRICS, Africa, they cannot refuse, and the influence Russia has on them is just overwhelming.
The economic cooperation is far too deep to say that political reasons can overwhelm.
Yes, for me.
So in final communique of the peace summit, there are a few points that, for example, Russia must withdraw their troops from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The main question: how to force Russia to do what we want, to do what Giorgia Meloni wants,
to give up.
That's why I think it's not possible at this point.
Is it possible on the second summit?
No.
We will certainly achieve some results on the second summit, diplomatic, because it's a long
You
run.
know how to force the troops out of somewhere?
You put their food away and not feed them.
Or you
They will
keep
give
them
up.
out with other troops. So that also depends on the battlefield situation. And the plant is such a great way to manipulate and to threaten. So they have a perfect ace in their hands. So I don't think you can force them at this point.
Not yet, and I believe that's a long story for another day.
But that's okay. That's not like this is the end of the... It's just, it takes time. And it's not month, 2 or 3, probably.
Maybe decades, but...
And the last yes or
We
no
are ready
question.
for this because actually, let's not forget that Zelensky was asked about the tiredness of Ukrainian people because it turns out that Europeans are pretty tired.
Yeah, they've been working so hard all this time. Well, like...
Like I appreciate it because the reporter, we have to say it. So she said she was reporting from Ukraine for 9 months. That's great. That's so great because many of them do not even come to Ukraine and do not see all of that happens here. And still some people say it's all not real. But at the same time, to ask the president of Ukraine and Ukrainians about the tiredness, well, we are tired, but the same question. So what do we have to do with this?
We can do nothing because we just have to do that to survive.
Because we have capitulation, bye-bye at this point, and that's the only offer we have from Russia.
I have the last yes or no question.
Yeah.
Do you think we need to invite Russia on the second peace summit? Yes or no?
That's up to our leadership to decide.
I don't think it's about peace summit, but we have to obviously we have to contact Russia at some point.
Who might do this from Ukrainian authorities?
I still believe more into some bilateral or negotiations with the third party than in a peace summit. The peace summit, they reject all the ideas presented at the peace summit. So there is no point simply.
Okay. For me, it's very, very, very interesting conversation.
We hope for our viewers as well.
Yeah, we were really enjoying the talk, about the red lines which were crossed and not crossed on this peace summit, and I am really eager and interested to see the second one.
Yes, and many questions will be answered on our next conversation. I remind our viewers that my name is Dmytro Klimyuk, my colleagues Pavlo Stelmach, Halina Babenko, and see you in the next episodes.
Thank you.